Merci, Emma. Bonjour, Madame Salle. Je parle français un petit peu, so we'll do this in English today. My apologies. It's a great pleasure to be at Paris Retail Week and to have the opportunity for some conversation about the state of the retail industry in the U.S. and also to talk about how we think the retail industry will change and evolve in the future, both as a result of the pandemic and also as a result of continued transformation in the industry. As you just heard in the last session, the many changes taking place in the digital world and the transformation that's occurring, both in e-commerce and in the use of stores and physical footprints. And we think that's going to accelerate very dramatically as we come out of the pandemic. So to begin, just a bit about the National Retail Federation, headquartered in Washington, D.C. We're the largest retail association in the world, largest retail association in the United States for 100 years, and represent all of retail, from Walmart to Amazon to the other big box stores, grocery stores, the chain restaurants, luxury, department, specialty, home goods, sort of tout le monde, all retail. We do a similar event to this. We do a large annual trade show in New York. Some of you maybe have been. Hopefully some of you will come back in January of 22. 2 years ago, almost, in 2020, we had more than 40,000 people, 8,000 exhibitors, hundreds of sessions and speakers. And I will say very encouraged to see this. This is a good sign. I think many of us want to be together again. There are some kinds of activity that is done most successfully in person, and we already have very good, promising numbers for January of 22 in terms of our expected attendees and exhibitors. And so we're very excited, and we hope to welcome many of you and many others from around the world back to New York. So let me start with the American consumer, because in the retail industry in the US and around the world, the consumer drives the industry. There's no other industry that is as consumer-centric as the retail industry. Retail preferences change based on consumer preferences and expectations. And so this is a slide, I don't want to get confused in the numbers, but over time shows the health of American consumers, household net worth. And this is the indication of why the retail industry in the United States is doing so well, even in the midst of the pandemic, because our government has put trillions of dollars into the pockets of consumers in the form of relief and additional spending in the last year. And consumers have, in turn, invested that in the retail industry, and primarily in retail because they couldn't travel. They couldn't go on vacation and holiday, entertainment, sporting events, and other things. So they shifted from experiences, they shifted from services, and put it into goods. And that explains the strength of the consumer, explains in the US, and I think around the world, the health of the industry. So for 2021 in the US, the retail industry actually did very, very well, fueled, as I said, by that government stimulus. Also fueled by increasing vaccination rates and a much healthier environment from a medical perspective. GDP continues to grow, and in our view, vaccination, although we sadly, I say sadly, the US now have fallen to the back of the pack relative to the G7 economies in terms of vaccination rates, which is very disappointing. You can tell I'm an unhealthy, I've had 3 doses already, so I'm fully of Moderna, and I wish all my colleagues and citizens of the US would. We're not there. We're making progress. So the consumer spending on goods shows year over year monthly sales since May of 2020. So since May of 20 on the far left, the lowest, that's when we had hardly any growth because the economy was closed in April. Every month since then, the retail industry has grown from one month to the next, over and over and over. And it did not end in 2020. It's continued in 2021, in spite of all of the challenges of having an even better year on top of a very good year last year. It's continued to improve. And this shows retail industries in the blue line relative to the Dow Jones or the Dow market, other companies. So retailers have done very well. And some of you may have heard or may remember talk of the retail apocalypse, the retail ice age, the end of retail a few years ago. Retail is not only not dead, it is doing very, very well, especially at a challenging time like this when consumers need the goods that retailers provide even more than ever. Now, this is an example of the retail industry relative to other industries, and you can imagine, based on the challenges of the pandemic, if you were in travel and hospitality and leisure and dining, it was a very challenging environment. But if you were in retail, because the consumer had those resources, it was very, very good. Consumers in the United States, through a combination of government support and redirected spending that would have otherwise gone to other activities and so couldn't be put to those, retailers have really benefited because consumers have $2.5 trillion in savings. So the savings rate in the United States is really at an all-time high. It's almost 10%. So again, I know I keep stressing, but consumers are extraordinarily healthy, and we think that means very, very good things for the retail industry, not just in 2021, but of course beyond. There were sectors that struggled in the retail industry, and you could see in the red line sort of how things fell. I think it's furnishings, electronics, clothing and accessories. In the early days of the pandemic, they were very depressed. In April and May, the United States was closed in 2020. But those are the industries that also came back and recovered most quickly. As you can see, that dramatic growth as the economy reopened and consumers put that money to work. So I guess to talk about what we expect for the rest of this year. Last year, because of this consumer strength and all of the resources put into the economy by the federal government, retail sales actually grew by nearly 7% in the US. So in the midst of the pandemic, we still had 7% growth in 2020 above 2019. That was the highest level of growth in almost 20 years in the US in the midst of the pandemic. Our forecast for this year is that retail sales are going to grow another 10 to 13% on top of last year. So compounding an already outstanding year, we're already seeing exceptional kind of performance in the retail industry this year, which is very challenging to do since last year growth was almost 7%. This year we expect more than 10% on top of that. So we're very confident. And although we've seen a little slowdown in our economy because of the Delta variant, we had so much growth in the first half of this year that we've already exceeded 7% for this year, just in the first 7 months. And we still have the holiday season and the remainder of this year. So we feel very confident in this number. This slide is a little bit of an example of how we think we tell the story about e-commerce and digital and the role that it plays in the economy. Many observers said that, well, the pandemic will be the death of stores. Everything will move to online because people don't want to go to stores and don't want to be gathered in large groups, and they want to do everything remotely and online. And so in the initial stages of the pandemic, you can see, again, I know there's a lot of bars there, but if you see April of 2020, Avril 2020 to the left, that shows the percentage of sales that occurred, that white line, digital sales went to 18.5% of all sales because stores were closed. So we all did things online. And people, observers, said, well, that means no one will ever go back to a store. Well, you can see the line has come back down as a percentage of overall sales. So for a short time, retail sales grew almost 19% online. But now we're back to 16%, back to more traditional numbers. So the notion that the pandemic in 5 months changed 5 years of retail, or 10 weeks brought around 10 years of change, just isn't borne out by the numbers. Consumers are going back to their habits, which is they go to the grocery store, they go to the department store, they go to the mall, they go to the specialty goods retailer. So there's been change, but not nearly as dramatic as many people predicted last year. Now, we're doing very, very well, and we're very confident about the future. We think consumers are in a very, very good place to make great progress. But of course, there are still hurdles, there are still challenges, and as retailers, as consumers, as consultants and advisors, and just every day in our own lives, all of we understand and we experience many of these challenges. And it's not just the masks and show the pass sanitaire and the other things that we all do. There are other pretty dramatic challenges. In the US, probably one of the greatest challenges we face are workforce issues and the shortages in the labor force. And so many people in the US and around the world were displaced from work. They lost their jobs, or they do not want to go back to their jobs, or they've got issues because they're fearful of the health environment, or they're taking care of children or family members or friends, and they change their lifestyle, they don't go back to work. So that's happened in every industry. This shows specifically the number of jobs open in retail, but if you elevate a level in the US, there are currently 11 million people in the US, based on the standard measure of unemployment, 11 million unemployed Americans, and there are 9 million job vacancies. So we have in our economy more unemployed people than vacancies. So we should be able to fill those positions, but there's a real mismatch in terms of the skills that people possess and the education levels and the jobs they're willing to take. So for the first time in our history, we have more people unemployed than we have jobs. We should have zero unemployment, and we don't, because we haven't solved that problem. And that, I think, the workforce dilemma, as we look beyond the pandemic into 22, 23, 24, there will be a very long period of time before we resolve those issues and have a workforce on the continent, in the EU, in Asia, and in the US, where the workforce matches the jobs that are available. And that will continue to challenge governments and citizens and communities, I believe, across the world. The other issue, as you all know, as you wait for the things that you've ordered, are the supply chain issues and the incredible challenges in the supply chain. And over the past quarter century, our society, through trade and technology, has perfected the supply chain to the point that we could order something in the US and here as well. For the holidays, maybe pick the Christmas holiday, and you would order on December 23, and you could have on Christmas Eve, delivered to your door, just in time, we would say. Well, that meant that there were very thin inventory levels, so that as soon as we stopped production because of COVID and workforce issues in Asia and places around the world, we stopped production, and then we surged in demand. Everyone wanted something. And the supply chain is not built to handle that kind of unexpected surge in demand. And every point along the way, from the factory to the transport, to the port, to the container ship, to the home port, to the crane operators, to the trucks, to the railheads, from the railheads back to trucks, trucks to distribution centers to the stores and to individual consumers. Each one of those is a pain point and a pressure point. And then you go back to the previous slide, there are labor shortages in every industry, not enough lorry drivers in the UK and on the continent, not enough qualified warehouse workers in any warehouse. You add all these things together and it magnifies the problem and the ripple effect that we're all experiencing as consumers in every category. And also, of course, drives up prices and causes inflation all along the way. And just to give one example, again, this is using the example of the largest ports in the US are on the West Coast in California, and the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach are adjacent to each other, not right next door, but they're close, and they share the body of water outside San Pedro Bay. And the ships go there, the containers, then they come into one port or the other port. On the far left, the lower, you would see almost no red. Those are blue ships. They come in, they go out. They come in, they go out. No one waits. The red line to the right, the rouge, oui, up, up, up. Those are ships waiting to unload the containers. Usually there are zero. No ships waiting. They come in, they go out. They come in, they go out. No one waits. Come across from Asia, they go back. They come in. At the moment, there are 75, as of last week, 75 container ships sitting in San Pedro Bay with almost 600,000 containers waiting to come into the port, which is 2 months of supply normally for that port. There's just too much demand, not enough capacity, and all of those workforce issues continue to compound things. That also will take a long time to sort out over the next several years for all of us as consumers. And so we should be thinking, as we think of solutions, if we are in retail or if we are advising retailers or if we are consumers, we should be thinking this is a fact of life that will not go away. So we should think ahead, what can we do, what should we do, even as a consumer. Okay, if it's the holidays, order the toys early for the kids and the clothing. But there are many things I think that are going to have implications for us as we work through this, and all of us should be aware of it. And the other thing, of course, we all learn to be much more patient with things, because this will not go away quickly. This is actually a snapshot. This was a picture of Long Beach. And on the coast of Asia, on the Chinese coast, it is 4 or 5 times worse than this. It's dramatically challenging there. So this, I said earlier, normally I would say, I love red. Je t'aime rouge. I don't like red here because it shows the U.S. is doing very poorly relative to other developed countries. Vive la France, right? France is doing great. Lots of vaccines. The U.S., not very good. This will hurt our economic recovery. There's a direct correlation between vaccination rates and economic activity. The higher the rate, the more likely the economy will be successful, because you don't have to close buildings, you don't have infections, you don't close workplaces. This is good news for countries that are higher. It's very bad news for the U.S. It means our recovery will take longer. It's not a medical issue, it's not a political issue, this is an economic issue. And unfortunately, too many Americans don't realize this. They're hurting the economy and themselves. The president continues to be measured and graded on performance on reacting to the COVID. These are some of the things recently announced in the U.S., which will continue to be our great challenge, and we'll continue to work on this. I think the big news of this, not specifically mentioned, but there was recently a rule issued by the federal government that all employers with 100 or more employees mandated that those employees be vaccinated. So that is one way to prod people along that are reluctant, is to say to large employers, all of your employees must be vaccinated. Some will say, no, I quit. And then we back to the workforce challenge if we don't have enough workers, because some will just resist and be skeptical. But we're making progress, but it is frustratingly slow. This is a lot to read, so I will just say that the objective here is to show in the US, historically, the kinds of things that we have done to support our economy and the percentage of GDP represented by that particular piece of legislation. So let's go down just about near the bottom, the middle. You see the Marshall Plan, which was the United States effort to help support the rebuilding of Europe after World War II. The Marshall Plan was very expensive. That was 5.5% of all of the US gross domestic product. The New Deal, which was the last major social legislation in the United States 100 years ago, 90 years ago, 12.5%. So then go back up to the top three items, and you see the percentages, 16.5, 5, 9. That's how much money we have put into our economy, unprecedented in the history of our country. And that's why consumers are so healthy. It just reinforces how much we have done to support the economy. And as a result, now we have the downside of that. Now we have inflationary pressures, we have supply chain disruptions, we've got workforce issues. So there is a plus and a minus to this. We're experiencing many of the pluses, but we're also getting some of the minuses, some of the negatives. So with the last minute or two here, I just talk about, again, I said earlier, I don't think that we've seen transformational change in consumer behavior, but we've seen accelerated change in the categories in which we already saw change as we went into the pandemic. People already shopped remotely. People already did touchless pay. People did buy online, pick up curbside in the US, many of those patterns. Those will continue, and we're seeing that happen for all age groups in the United States, in spite of the fact that people are returning to doing things online and returning to stores at the same time. So I think as a key takeaway, consumer trends, some of these, the acronym I'm not a fan, but the first one means buy online, pick up in store. It's easy. We all like the convenience. We do things digitally. We like to have things delivered if we can avoid a trip. We like the flexibility. We like the seamless experience of deciding, sometimes I want to be social. I'll go to the store. I'll go to the mall. I'll go for a walk. Sometimes I just need it and I want it delivered. Sometimes I'm running an errand. I'll pick it up at the store, but I don't want to get out of the car. I think flexibility and convenience will be driving consumer preferences as we go forward. And that flexibility and those fulfillment options will have great implications for retailers. The digital transformation, you just heard that in the last session. This is true everywhere. It will continue. This was a real opportunity to reimagine the way stores and digital live together. And I guess if there's one truly changed behavior, it may be not on the part of consumers, but it's on the part of retailers. Retailers have fundamentally changed the way they think about stores. It's not just a place to sell. It's a place to sell, but it's a place to do other things, and it's a different kind of an asset. And so I think you'll see more creative uses of physical spaces on the part of retailers as we move out of the pandemic and into the next phase of our recovery. Again, I would finish by saying that the retail industry has played an outstanding role in the recovery of our economies, keeping people safe, healthy, giving them the goods they needed at a time when they needed it most. I think all of us in the industry should be proud of that. It's also a cutting-edge industry that is adopting new technologies, serving customers in new ways, continuing to find solutions. We didn't even talk about ESG issues. We didn't talk about diversity and inclusion issues. There are so many important elements to the retail industry. Retail is a fundamental part of our daily lives. It touches us in ways that no other industry does and will continue to do so after the pandemic. Thank you so much. A pleasure to be with you.